So let us begin with our first panel. And let us begin by examining the state of public transit in Massachusetts. What is the lay of the land out there? And to go into this, one of our panelists hasn't arrived yet, so we're going to begin anyway. I want to introduce both of our panelists that are here and then turn it over to them. Joshua Ostroff, to the end of the table, is a Natick selectman who has many Natick selectman jobs to do today and is good enough to spend some hours with us this morning. And he serves as the Partnerships Director of Transportation for Massachusetts. Transportation for Massachusetts is a longtime advocacy organization focused on transportation, obviously, and Joshua is a past president of the Massachusetts Municipal Association as well. Next to me is Jeremy Mendelson, is a regular commentator on public transit issues through his project, Transit Matters, and he's also on the advisory board of Livable Streets. So, Joshua, if you would take it from here, we appreciate you being here and waiting to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you all for being here, and to Kalita and SEIU for making the space available for this great discussion. So I'm, Transportation for Massachusetts also is a coalition. We have 58 members all across the state, many in the Boston area, but several out in Western, Central Mass, Merrimack Valley, South Coast, and unified by a concern that people need mobility to get around to lead their lives in order to have healthy and resilient communities. And our goals are to achieve climate resilience, to provide social opportunity and mobility for all, to improve public health, and transportation is really key to all of those things. So I want to make sure folks have a little information about us, and you can sign up to get email and participate in various events and causes that we advocate.
Joshua, why don't you give me those and I'll just make...
I think folks
Does everyone not have one of these? Does everyone have one in their packet? No?
It's not in the packet, it was on the table.
Okay, so there's some more over here.
So in particular, I just want to acknowledge a few of our members that are here today. Jeremy with Transit Matters is one of our coalition members, and Mass PERG and 350 Mass will be speaking later. Jack Spence is a great advocate for that, and many of you may have been part of the work that we've done over the years. So I think that the state of transportation and transit in Eastern Mass is obviously troubled, but at least it's on the front burner. At least it's something that people really care about. Not just if you ride the bus every day or endure the trains or commuter rail as I do, or ferries or aeronautics or all the other things that are part of the Mass DOT umbrella, but because it's critical to the health of our and well-being of our communities and to the regional economy. And we saw what happened when the T shut down. It cost businesses their very existence, and it cost a lot of people their. And I personally am very fortunate. I can work from home if I need to. I don't have a job, bussing tables or cleaning hotel rooms. So it's not critical that I get to my office, although my coworkers like it. But we know for people, particularly for people lower income with less opportunity, it is absolutely vital, and it's just so important that we make sure that we provide a dependable and affordable means to get around. So I think the state of it is, first, we've got people's attention. That's great. Second, there is a real commitment now at the very top of state government to really diagnosing and fixing the things that have plagued the system for years. And I think it's very important for us to try to get a 360-degree view of the issues and understand that, like any organization, probably more than many, more than all perhaps, the MBTA has not been well managed in many respects. And that's not to indict the people that work there. It's really, I think, a combination of neglect that the system has had over the years from revenue. It's been a bit of a patronage haven for folks. It has never had the kind of close examination that any organization needs to meet the challenges it faces. And what could be more difficult than running a transit authority? I mean, that's why there's so, problems are so many. So there's a new focus on making sure that performance is what it needs to be for the benefit of the people that depend on it. and that there's accountability so that there are, measurements that in place to say, here's what we need for on-time percentage, and here's what we need for, all the other measures that go into it. So that's critical, and it's wonderful to have a Secretary of Transportation who has been a longtime advocate for many of the values that I think all the folks in this room care about, making sure that transportation works for everybody and does so affordably. But there's a lot of concerns that we have. To what extent is the false debate between reform and revenue, or between maintenance and expansion, going to distract people from making the kinds of investments that I think are the central reason we're here today? To support, no amount of reform is going to make sure that we have all the new buses and trains and staff and new capital investments that we need. We're going to need new revenue, and the question is how to get to that point. So I want to just spend my last couple of minutes talking about what's required to move us forward. First, it's going to be really altering the public narrative and getting away from finger pointing at, bus drivers who take time off to, to care for someone who's sick, and thinking about, do we have the right staffing and routes? What kind of system do we really need to operate well? But also just talking about how critical investment is in transit for the well-being of the economy. And to change that narrative, we're going to need many, many voices, not just progressives. You're going to need people who don't identify as progressives. You're going to need mayors from outside the Boston area and selectmen like myself. Well, I'm there, but most of my colleagues are not. The narrative is still the idea of bailing out the money. You're going to need business leaders, large and small alike. You're going to need, staffers and legislators and administrators, within the Baker administration to get on board. So that changing the narrative is really very important, and it's something that our coalition is hard at work on. And part of doing that, I think, is good factual reports. So just to tip of the cap to Kirsty Pecci, who will be here later, she and other members of our coalition produce these reports that take a clear look at where we are at with transportation investments mandated in 2013 and in subsequent legislation. How are we doing with all the different reforms and revenue sources that were identified? So the that switches to reform. Reform is sort of a catch-all, and it means different things to different people. In my final minute, I'll say that phrasing revenue has to get away from the idea of taxes and what we pay to investments and what we get, and what those benefits really are. So we can't rely on people buying into the argument that it only costs another nickel or 10 cents or whatever on the gas tax. I'll gladly pay that because I know what I get for it. But if you think of why Donald Trump is so popular, and I'm sorry to mention his name, it's because we saw it in the recent report. He's speaking a language that resonates at a 4th grade level. That's very depressing, but it's true, is that we want to have to kind of dumb it down and make sure people understand what the benefits are. So, and the last thing that we're trying to work on is the whole idea of what transformation in transportation really means. When we talk about like the sharing economy and Zipcar and new parking technologies and how to get the most out of what we've got, we all need to be at the forefront of that conversation and make sure that a service like Bridge and and how taxi services will evolve in the years to come, those are really important complements to a transit system, because if you talk to the folks in transit, they're always talking about that last mile problem. Let's make that personal. How does a woman get to take care of an aging parent from Eagleston or some other station where she gets off her bus or her train? So thinking systematically on how it all works together, it's going to be a blend of private and public delivered services, but it all needs to have that, be under that umbrella of accountability. Being elected and getting paid $50 a year, I could talk for much longer than we have, but I really want to hear what Jeremy has to say and then engage in dialogue with the folks here. And again, thank you for all putting this together, and do sign up. Thank
Jeremy.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to put this together, and thanks for having us. I'm really happy that this issue is starting to get some attention. I've often felt over the years that transportation was something that people just dealt with. They just got used to the system working the way it is. And I think people are really starting to understand the importance of good mass transit. And I don't think I need to convince anybody in this room that public transit is really important for reasons of social, environmental, and economic justice, and sort of leveling the playing field so that everybody is able to access the places that they need to go and that they have mobility to move around their city. Transit is very important for issues of environment, of health. There's always new information coming out. I just heard a study published recently showing that there's a link between traffic noise and neurological development in young children. So this stuff is always coming out, and it's always making the case so much more important. Supporting vibrant, dense cities. I mean, everybody knows that Boston would not be what it is today without transit. A lot of people don't know that a lot of the development in Boston would be considered illegal under today's zoning codes because you have to provide a certain number of parking and land use. Okay, so so as I was saying, transit is important for reasons of land use, making efficient land use in cities, places where we want to be. And as we saw in the winter, transit is the lifeblood of the economy. It supports everybody. Even I would make the case to people who don't use transit, say, why should I pay for the T? Say, well, even if you never use the T, you rely on all the people that do, whether that be your friends and family or the people that work at the restaurants and the stores and provide the city services that you depend on, that the majority of those people are using transit. And we here in Boston are fortunate to have a comprehensive transit network, but the network really doesn't work well anymore. It is mostly descendant of streetcars, and we really have not invested in the system over the years, so that chronic underinvestment causes these systems to be unreliable, to have all kinds of problems that we experience on a day-to-day basis, from rail reliability to bus bunching and all the rest. And the daily crises, and combined with the budget cuts over the years, have led to a system and a culture where there's really no vision for improving the system because the T staff and others are so focused on daily, putting out fires every day that they're not able to. There's no real vision for what we want transit to be, how we're gonna the network to serve people. What are the issues? And I break down the three main issues facing transit in Boston into these three categories. One being this underinvestment. The second being the fact that because we have not invested in the system, our population has grown significantly, 10% since 2004. Employment is soaring, and because we have not invested in the transit system, the transit is severely overcrowded. Many of the bus lines you cannot get on. In the rail lines, it takes 2.5 minutes to board a red line train at downtown crossing, and the train's supposed to be running every 4.5 minutes. It just physically doesn't work. And as a result of this, traffic congestion is getting worse because people are not able to choose transit, so they're driving. Our regional transit is really poor, has never really been addressed. We have trains running every 2.5 hours, reliability issues. We have all these cars driving into the city, creating all this congestion, and as a result, bus travel times are increasing. And despite this increase in population and employment, we have not invested in the transit system to keep up. There has barely been any investment at all. Actually, the service hours have actually declined on the bus side. And lastly, we have a very inefficient network. As I said, the transit system is largely descended from the original streetcars of 100 years ago. And with the exception of a few minor tweaks when the Orange Line was relocated, terrible planning decision, by the way. When that happened, we adjusted a few of the bus routes, but we really have the same system that we've always had. There have been a few investments over the years, a few new initiatives. Some of the crosstown services, routes like the 111, like Route 9, have been immensely popular when these things have been done. But we've been because we've just been sort of doing the same thing we've always done because we've never, made any investment or had any vision. And so as a result, most of the services are slow, they're indirect, they're infrequent, they're unreliable, they're uncomfortable. We can't even get on the bus. The T right now, with their standards, because of the way their budget situation is, they consider if there's 50 people on a bus, they consider that not a need for change. Because so there's 39 seats on a bus. 50 people means that there's 11 people standing. It means it's very hard to get to the door. You know, there's a line of people waiting to pay the fares, obviously, and you lead to bus bunching, long gaps. The T doesn't have a plan to deal with any of this because they've never been able to really think of that, to move there. And this also, I want to touch a little bit on the regional transit authorities. I focus a lot on my work at the MBTA, but a lot of these issues are relevant to the regional transit authorities. And it's increasingly relevant as people are getting pushed out of the city because of increasing housing prices. Because another thing, as the population has gone up and the employment has gone up, we have not made significant investments in housing. So what that's doing is we're getting a lot of people having to move farther and farther out. And I've said, you know, where are these people going? Well, people are going to Brockton, they're going to Lawrence, they're going to Haverhill. They're going to places that are pretty far out, but they're still having to come back because they have jobs here, they have their health centers here, and so the RTA services are increasingly important. You know, it's like the BAT bus, number 12, going down to Brockton. There's a connection up to Lowell, but it's very long and difficult. You have to make a transfer that's not coordinated in Burlington. So, and of course, commuter rail fares can be unaffordable for many. So, you know, with the RTAs, they suffer from a lot of these network design issues, but there's also frequency. The fact that we have these issues in Boston, and we often like to say frequency is freedom. Well, the service is very infrequent in a lot of these RTAs. I lived in Worcester for a long time. The service is every hour in most places. You have to make a connection downtown that's not coordinated. And, you know, there's almost nothing on evenings and weekends. And these choices are often very poor, and transit doesn't really serve that. So in the end, it really all comes back to funding. All the things that we need to do, the frequency, the span, improving the network, all this stuff requires additional funding. And cities are growing, infrastructure costs money, and we have to make that case that this is important, that public transit is important, and we need to invest in it. Thank you.